All right. Hey, everybody. I'm Tanner Steed. Hi, Tate. This is Mr. Benjamin Walling. We are painters, artists, some may say. And today we're going to be talking about composition. Composition. What the heck is that, Ben? What is composition?
Obviously, most of you in this room are artists. Some are brand new to art, or maybe have never even tried it.
Interested in reading art.
Composition is essentially the first thing you will consider when you're designing a painting. It is, at its essence, it's a visual statement.
Right. It's like it is the most important thing that you get right, but it's often the last thing that you learn. And it's kind of a normal, more higher level thinking topic to get into. So it's normal to learn it later on. And you'll continue to go back to learning composition as you work.
There's also a lot of elements to what is a composition. You can't answer that in one sentence. There's many things that go into it. We're breaking it down into what we're calling compositional pillars. So these will be frameworks that you can actually use and take note of while you work and sort of check your work so you can answer the question, is my composition working? Is this picture working?
And honestly, this is a very limited list of things that you can keep in mind while composing. But these pillars, if you can imagine some kind of epic structure like this. Okay, what makes a great composition is the use of all of these pillars that creates a very clear, distilled visual statement to drive a narrative, whether it be literally telling a story, like if you're doing some kind of biblical scene and painting a story in the Bible, or if you're just doing a still life and you're just talking about the light. You need to be able to simplify all of these elements that we're going to be discussing today to draw someone's attention from across the museum. As you're walking through a museum, you're going to notice that as you look to your right, your left, some of the paintings are literally going to be pulling you in. Others you'll walk right past and you won't even notice. And we're going to be talking why that is.
So prior to rendering, prior to adding any color, you have composition. And as Tanner talked about, composition is the element that will pull you in from across the room. And you can do this on a subconscious level with a strong composition. You can have a gut reaction with a strong composition, an emotional reaction with a strong composition. It's the most powerful tool we have as artists, and we'll get into why that is.
Why don't we start with the armature, and then I'll do the little...
Yes, I agree.
Okay, cool. So, just out of curiosity, who has ever seen this by show of hands? Okay. Best guess as to what an armature could possibly be?
Structure.
That's exactly right.
That's exactly it. It's the structural integrity of a painting. And often, way back in the Renaissance, painters would start with literally an armature drawn out on their canvas with charcoal. And not even just on their canvas, but on their drawings. And this would literally be the scaffolding to make compositional decisions. You're going to notice that there are intersecting lines at various points, depending on the aspect ratio of your image. So if it's really narrow, you're going to have slightly different sections and triangles. But these are points where you can add any compositional element. It could be, we're going to get into detail as to what all of these are, but it could be a focal point. It could be a psychological focal point. It could be an area of rest.
Within your composition, within your picture, your painting you're creating, essentially it's this marriage of shapes. and the armature is going to help you logically place these shapes. And if the structure of your painting is sound and logical, and it lives within like a unified, strong foundation, it's going to be easier on the eye. It's going to be more legible, just more coherent of an image.
Right, and these lines are seen underneath, and they become like imaginary lines when you're looking at an artwork. So once it's finished, they should almost completely disappear. Until they're pointed out, you're kind of unaware. You're like, wow, this one's so strong, but why? It's likely to do with the positioning of elements along an armature.
And you can also sort of modify this armature to your needs. And when you're starting out, if you're new to painting or if you struggle with composing, like Tanner said, you can actually put down an armature underneath and build on top of that. And the idea there is through repetition and a strong understanding of that armature, it becomes inherent and subconscious, and you'll start making decisions based on the armature over the armature without even drawing it, because you have a strong understanding of these points are meaningful, these points will guide the eye to the right place in the painting.
So I'm sure, maybe you haven't seen this, but if you've taken any kind of photography class, you may have heard of the rule of thirds. This is like the most simplified proportional framework for a composition. If you're an absolute beginner and you're trying to make a composition look interesting, it is advised to position your focal point or the subject of the scene at one of these intersections. You can see that this kind of translates to this more complicated armature at just a couple of these points, right? So this one, if you guys are writing down in a notebook, this would be a good thing to include all of the ones I'll draw up here. So that one is called the rule of thirds.
And you also have...
So along maybe, okay, so what I'm going to be drawing up here are kind of compositional presets. They're simplified versions of scenes that you can, once you memorize these, you're going to be able to look at a scene and notice that it fits with a particular theme that I'll be demonstrating up here. So I'm just going to go through with each one of these examples, and you'll kind of see how they're slightly different, but they all relate in the fact that they're all strong compositions. So let's say we are painting a scene, something like, I don't know, landscape, okay? And I've positioned the horizon line nice and low, and according to the rule of thirds, I've placed a focal point a third of the way in from the right and from the bottom. Well, another compositional framework to add on top of the rule of thirds is including radial lines. So this compositional preset is called radial. This would work, let's say, if there was a road, or like a railroad is the classic example, where you're traveling into space and you see that these lines are both going into space, but they're also pointing at a focal point. Look here, look here. That's what those are all saying.
This is kind of like the classic New York City cityscape.
Totally. Could be a cityscape. It could also be a farmhouse with a huge sky, and you're designing the clouds to point towards the barn. Look at the barn. This is so exciting. So radial. Okay, moving on. Then there is one of my favorites, which is called the steel yard balance. What do you call it? It sounds cooler.
I said the apothecary scale.
The apothecary scale, and you can kind of combine the two. But it essentially says that there's a large object on the right and a small object, a large object on the left or the right, and it's balanced with a small object on the right. So this has high contrast, dark against light. This has high contrast, dark against light. And what we can't see, according to the apothecary scale idea, is that the fulcrum for this scale exists somewhere in between these two. That can literally be an object, or rather than an object, a compositional element, something that you place in here to add emphasis to a point. Or it could be imaginary, and you don't have to paint it in. Okay, but you can kind of imagine the steelyard, it's holding something. The heavy object is on one side, the light object is on the other. If you want to turn your attention to that back corner, there is an incredible Daniel Sprick painting using this compositional framework.
It's about as classic of an example of it as you can get. The right third of the painting is very heavy with objects. There's a lot going on. It's taking a ton of your attention. Now, if you were to imagine the painting without that plate on the left side, all of your visual weight would be in one area, and all these radiating lines coming out of it, and
we'd refer to that as unbalanced.
Unbalanced.
If everything was on the right.
It would take all of your attention. So in order to counterbalance that, you can have a much smaller object far away on the other side, and it balances the visual weight of the image. And this is Dan obviously didn't come up with this. This is a classic technique, and you'll find that there's a lot of problems you can solve with this, especially if you have a very direct, very obvious focal point. You're kind of throwing the viewer for a loop, like throwing them off the trail to make your focal point not too obvious, right?
Okay, so moving on from that, we have, what do we call this? Central focus, okay? This is more like not Baroque painting, but Renaissance, high Renaissance, like Italian Renaissance painting, where it's Jesus and Mary right in the middle. Everything is symmetrical. Everything is perfect. Okay, this used to be extremely popular in the 17th century, but around the Baroque, they started adding more dynamic, unbalanced pictures. Not unbalanced in the way I was describing poor steelyard balance, but having more information on one side, less on the other. So this is called central focus. This can give, each one of these can give a different emotional effect. This one is very calming, centered, right? You can also, as you're composing, notice the body language that you use when emoting an emotion. Are you doing this? Are you doing this? We're going to be talking about, in a later slide, about adding caricature into your work.
There's an Abbott Thayer painting. It's a still life of, it's a vase with flowers coming out, and it's just directly in the center. And it's pretty fascinating when you see that painting in person. It is literally calming, and
Abbott Henderson Thayer.
Yeah, it has that psychological effect.
Another one would be, oh my gosh, it's Abbott Thayer again, actually. It's his wife with his two kids.
Well, if you think about his figures, he's doing that pretty consistently.
Dude, we'll find that later because that's a prime example. Okay, another one is the Fibonacci sequence. Fibonacci sequence, or the golden ratio, is a ratio of 1 is to 1.618, which is like the golden spiral. Okay, we're going to have a very clear example of this later that I wanted to talk about the entire time, but Ben kept saying, no, we got to use a different painting. We got to use a different painting. And it's essentially just this naturally occurring organic shape that has just natural rhythm to it. And we find it allegedly in all of the measurements in your hand and in a conch shell, sunflowers, they all have this. I guess the original story was back in the time of the Renaissance, they were like, hey, Ben, hold this paintbrush. And the person would grab the brush, and most often the average of all of the people grabbing not a paintbrush, but like a stick was the golden ratio, because it felt right. And so they're like, oh, this must be some kind of high-level spiritual way of composing. We should add that into our work. So is it real? Maybe. Or is it... it's certainly real now with all of the societal background and subconscious.
You'll see with the painting that Tanner's talking about, with this golden ratio, it's not like you are literally drawing a spiral or you are using visual elements within the piece to guide the eye around. So there might be a tree in one corner pushing you towards a cloud, and then so it's just another way of using ratios to divide up your painting. You could think of it as a variation on triangles that are organized. And you could arrange your armature to be like that if you were to use straight lines to build up that golden ratio. There's a lot of different armature tricks you can use.
Okay, this next one and the last one. By the way, they're not limited to the ones that I'm drawing today. There are dozens and dozens to choose from. I'm just giving you 6 to think about and to start to pick up on these preset compositional structures, hopefully to benefit you when you're trying to come up with your own. So this one, I'm looking over there at the armature, and this one is called the zigzag. Notice where I stopped and continued. I was referring to this guy, bouncing from one place to the next. This zigzag, although it may not look like anything right now, I want you to imagine that this is more like a mountain stream coming down, and then these are the different tiers of mountains, okay? So the zigzag is one thing. And the placement of each zig and zag is according to some kind of armature that you've set up.
Later we'll be doing a demo, and you will see elements of all of these things within the paintings that Tanner and I are going to be starting. So all of these tools, it's not necessarily like I'm going to base my painting around one of these. It's, I mean, and it might be helpful to do studies just based on one at a time, but it goes back to the armature like we talked about, making these things subconscious for you as the artist. So you can essentially pull your viewer whatever way you want. You can...
Because that's exactly what our job is. As composers, we are directors for a scene, right? We're not just merely copying what's happening out there. We're taking that and creating a piece of art with a capital A. And in order to do so, we have to be designing our compositions.
Right, and that design, you know, sometimes people will see impressionist paintings and think like, I don't have to think while I paint. I can just throw abstraction at the wall and come out with something interesting because I'm interesting and therefore my painting must be interesting.
It has nothing to do with rendering. It could be a super loose painting and have a killer composition. It has nothing to do with, rendering.
So these tools are about having intention behind your marks and the shapes you're using and important relationships between the objects. So you're conscious of of what you're doing to the viewer when they step up to your painting.
So before we continue on to some specific compositional elements, I wanted to ask you guys if you needed any clarification on this or anything else that we've discussed so far.
So
Yes.
these are called armatures. These are examples of armatures.
So your question is, are these examples of armatures?
Right.
Yes, you can think of it like that.
Okay.
Traditionally, the armature is more the diagonal lines, and all of these rely on placement along those diagonal lines.
Okay.
So when I say armature, I more mean this kind of thing. I'm going to screw this up. Boop, boop. Yeah, you get the point. Okay.
I think I would refer to them as like trends or elements because it's not always so
Not
literal,
elements,
you know.
trends, yeah.
Trends.
Because elements is something else.
But all of those are sort of based on points within that armature too.
You're right. Yes.
You can sort of get a mathematical sense of, well, this will be here because this point in this armature.
That's right.
So it's sort of balanced.
That's exactly right.
maybe.
Can you also think of it as scaffolding?
Scaffolding is perfect. Perfect.
One thing I want to point out about the armature is one reason that we use ratios, whether it's a half, a third, a quarter, a fifth, or a tenth to organize spatial relationships in our painting is not just this will make it so much more convincing for the viewer. I'm putting a lot of emphasis on that, but a large part of it is just to make your job easier. You know, painting is very difficult, so if you could find things that make you second guess yourself less and make your painting process more fluid, your designing process more fluid, using these ratios is, I mean, it's going to save you a lot of time.
Right.
Do you have any examples of bad composition?
Yes. We will talk about that later,
Okay.
and I'll show you how to resolve it.
Okay.
Great. Okay,
That'll come up in my
Ben,
demo.
what the heck is rhythm? And why is this painting so incredible?
So,
It can speak for itself, but I want Ben to explain.
So basically, we've talked about these foundational principles, creating great structure and creating a foundation for a strong painting.
Right, generally. Now we're getting more specific.
When it comes to that, it can be quite boring if you're just building boxes on a painting and overthinking this. So we use rhythm as a tool in art to keep things interesting and to have repetitive flowing lines and a combination of long, medium, and short lines and variety in our image to provide intrigue and interest for the viewer.
And so rhythm can be equated to a musical term, right? It's the beat that you're visually seeing. In this case, we may see the rhythm of the figures. There's more happening here, there's less happening here. So it's like ba 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 ba, right? So it's an energy flow through placement of objects. If you look back at that Daniel Sprick again, we'll have to take a picture and add it to the video. There is rhythm in not only the placement of the objects, but also in the way that the quilt was, not quilt, what is this? Crochet was created. There's rhythm within those shapes. Rhythm can only happen when you have a repeating unified pattern. So it's the same thing happening over and over and over again, but in an interesting spacing. So with rhythm, the most important thing to do is to make sure that your intervals are irregular, a little bit unpredictable. If you listen to Bach, it's going to sound very similar throughout, but he'll go on and add a little bit here, add a little bit there. But it all has the main theme. You can think of the same thing in terms of shape and linear rhythm too.
This is also just, this design principle is really built upon us living in an organic world. If you're painting a tree, you have the structure of a tree trunk, which is, you know, relatively linear, but it's not. Every angle, every curve is going to be a little bit different from the next. And if you're drawing or illustrating leaves, rhythm is being conscious to make things repetitive but not the same. So they're repeating, but each one is a little bit different, and it might be spiraling, it might be... so obviously, none of these figures are exactly the same. And I also think of rhythm as variety in your image. And it also has to do with unity in your image. But one way to think about rhythm, especially for artists, is through actually drawing the figure. You have, if you're figure painting or figure drawing, you have this rigid structure. You start out with anatomy, and you start with the rib cage and the pelvis and the head, and you might be using circles or boxes, and you start with this structure. However, a figure is not, it's not a strong figure drawing. It's not a true piece of art until you've given this figure character and gesture and personality and character. You have the gesture of the foot. You have their clothing that interrupts like obvious shapes. It lends itself to narrative. It lends itself to composition. This is essentially rhythm.
So one of the rhythms that you can see here is a line length that's changing as you move up the form. And there's one thing I need to point out first. This side is much calmer, whereas this side is much more active. Do you see that? So it's the alternating of active versus relatively inactive sides of not just figures, but any kind of compositional element. So whether it be camels or if it's a leg, you need to consider active versus inactive areas. So rhythm is found on a macro scale and on a micro scale. Everything is designed.
Right. If you go back, okay, so go back to that painting really quickly.
By the way, this is Solomon J. Solomon.
It's one of the best paintings of all time, but there's a lot happening here, and it's a very busy image. And the reason why that works is because, this is building off what Tanner was just saying, is because of this negative space here, where essentially nothing is happening. You do have some narrative elements back there, but if you squint, they kind of fall apart, and it's not like a strong compositional element. You have this tapestry in the back where nothing's really happening. So you have extreme action in the center. You have this big spiral of light shapes pointing in, and then you have things pulling out, and it's just all very intense. But it wouldn't work unless there were passive areas where for your eye to rest, and it makes your composition more convincing.
Okay, so before we move on to the next element, I want to see if you guys can find any of these compositional presets within here. And here's a little clue. There's more than one.
Yeah.
Tate.
Definitely the, Fibonacci for sure.
Okay, definitely the Fibonacci sequence. You're seeing a spiral in there.
And also radial lines.
And also radial lines. Excellent. Do you see any others, Lindsay?
Go ahead.
Sorry. Steelyard, absolutely. That's the one I'm most excited about. For some reason, I just love that one.
Which was Steve?
I think this one right here,
yeah.
where you've got a massive attention with just a little bit on the side. Large, small.
And if that's confusing for you, it's a steelyard because they're both light shapes.
And I want you to imagine you're the artist. You're Solomon J. Solomon. You're designing this picture, and you've got this huge shape right here, and this small shape right here. By shape, I'm saying light against dark, right? Kind of obvious. Why on earth do you think he added this? Because it's not random. Lindsay?
Is it to have like an exit point?
Okay, so there could
The
be,
intensity of the scene in the front.
so there could be an exit point. There are a number of different reasons. It's not just one. So it could be an exit point. It could be creating more depth. He wanted the room to feel larger. Or because we're talking about composition. Composition, let me just say, is just two-dimensional, flat. Last episode, last lecture was all about distance, depth, right? So this is thinking very 2D, shape, shape, shape. I think he felt that without this light shape, it didn't feel,
Balanced.
thank you, it didn't feel balanced, exactly. So, yeah, if something doesn't feel balanced and you have too much weight on one side, you can either remove weight or you can add weight to the other. Okay, let's move on to, what do you want to do?
Why don't you pull up the Dean Cornwell?
Dean Cornwell. This one?
Yes. So this is, do you mind if I?
Yeah. Oh,
So this is a painting by Dean Cornwell. Actually, next door there's a couple original illustrations from Dean Cornwell. But this is an example of using repetition as rhythm and repeating shapes and radiating lines, but also specifically using arrows to create a very strong central focus and focal point within a painting. So one thing that I like to do when I am breaking down a composition or trying to understand a composition is I will break it down into a just purely black and white image, take the saturation away, so I'm not even thinking about color. I'm just thinking about light value and dark value and what is it communicating. Here we have these sort of interlocking triangles pointing to the action that's most important in this painting. This is obviously not an accident. This is a design element he used very early on in the process of creating this.
all the arrows are saying, look here, look here, look here.
Mm-hmm.
Not here.
How you're getting that bottom line that cuts from the light into the dark.
This guy?
Yeah.
It's a continuation of,
And how it, I don't quite understand why it keeps going into the dark.
it's a continuation of this shape all the way up. It goes up his leg here.
Ooh. This is,
And also this stool is tilted this way.
do you see how the stool is tilted? So this is actually really important. This goes up, but oh my God, it misses the action. Why on earth is it going that way? That was intentional, because here's why. If you have everything pointing, it will look overly designed. It can kind of look corny. But if you have things saying over there and over there, you know, or a grouping of arrows that are more intense and themes on that, those rhythmic lines. That's why I would assume that one is not pointing that way. You can even see the rhythm in the dress is mimicking, look up there, look up there. This one is going down.
Well, I wanted to expand upon this a little bit because I started looking harder at this image and noticing that there were triangles everywhere radiating from the central point. It's not necessarily one, it's not like you put a pinhole in the middle of the painting and you say they're all right there. You can use that, but they're all pushing your eye toward the center, toward this action, towards the two main characters there. Yeah, I just thought this was a pretty brilliant use of rhythm and repetition to strengthen your composition.
Okay, another test. What do you guys see? Which of these compositional templates is most obvious to you? There's more than one answer.
Definitely thirds.
Okay, rule of thirds.
Where the horizon is there.
Yeah.
Okay,
I see
horizon.
the radial.
Radial lines, that's right. That, I would say, is probably the most. Look at this arm. Everything is gesturing towards her face. This is the main character. This is the, what is it? Main character. Side character?
Oh, supporting cast.
Supporting cast.
Supporting cast,
That's
yeah. So
That's what I was supposed to say.
also a huge zigzag going from the landscape down the spine and then down the leg. That's pretty fun, but.
So another thing to note is the use of the horizon line. So because we have varying painting skills in here, some people may be just starting out, I want you to look at where Jules Bastien-Lepage has placed the horizon line. It's way up at the top, and she runs into that point. So this scene is happening below the horizon line. Just a reminder, the horizon line is your eye level. Has nothing really to do with where the sky meets the ocean, as much as it has to do with your height. So if I'm, squatting down and looking up at Ben, then my horizon line is really low. So he looks significantly taller than me and can create a certain emotion.
Right.
Whereas the opposite, if I was really tall looking down at someone, well then that is going to have a different psychological effect.
The horizon line is such a central part of creating a painting, understanding where the horizon line is. It may not exist and it may not be visible in your piece. You may have maybe a still life inside. You may have something completely obscuring the horizon.
But you can always find it, even though you can't see the horizon line.
And if you can't find it, you need to, for sure.
Yes. So because we're looking up at this magnificent structure, you can look at the lines that are sloping. Interesting, this line is sloping down and to the right. Do you guys see that? Mm-hmm. And this line is sloping down and to the left. Our horizon line is below that point. This is 2-point perspective. And we kind of talked about this during the depth lecture. But actually, it's a bit lower than that. The lower your horizon line is, the more of the focus, more of the story is going to be above it. I know this seems obvious, but I've had students in the past say, okay, I really want to paint like a big sky. It's all about the cloud. But then they put their horizon line right in the middle. So what should they do? They should lower it, because that tells us that the sky is where the story is at. Versus the other way around, painting plants, we're looking down, or if we're above a character, looking down on a scene, your horizon line would be higher.
Right, like if you're painting a village or a town and you're on the second story, you put your horizon line fairly low. Now all your focus is on what's happening within that village, and it gives your story, your narrative, and your characters more meaning if you're placing figures. Where here, for instance, the figures are very secondary to this massive structure. And yeah, it's no accident. It's that really low horizon line.
So when you're back in your studios and you're about to design your next painting, I want you to consider the placement of the horizon line based on the emotion that you want to elicit in your story. Even if it's a scene with simple objects, a still life or a barn or a cityscape, think about, do you want the viewer to feel like this character is really powerful and exciting? Lower the horizon line. If you would like them to feel like we should feel sorry for them or we're looking down on them, then make it higher. It's going to have different subconscious effects. And notice the next time you're in an art museum and you're like, wow, this one makes me feel this way. Describe the composition in terms of these elements, and you're going to be able to kind of dissect it. And if you can dissect it, then you can try to reinvent it.
And actually, since we're talking about the emotional impact of composition and the psychological impact of composition, that just reminded me of, I think it was like a Jack and the Beanstalk illustration or something like that, where when I was a kid, I remember seeing this horizon line extremely low, and you're looking up at this giant beanstalk.
Right,
It's
'cause the
pushing
beanstalk
way
is-
into the sky. And that's taking up a majority of the composition of the image, and it just makes it feel huge, and it makes the viewer feel small in comparison to what you're looking at. And it's just a statement.
Okay.
How about contrast of shapes, I think would be. Wow, the more I look at this painting, it is quite ugly.
Ugly, really? Okay, this is the one Ben and I have a little bit of issue with. You may look at this and be like, that is a fabulous painting. We like it, but we want to love it. And we're going to show you how to change it to make it so we love it. With just a very subtle alterations.
To be clear, we did select it because we liked it.
Yes.
We
Yeah,
both
we
agreed
mostly
that it was a
like it.
good painting. And then
That's right.
the more we looked, the more we kind of it fell apart in certain areas.
So our main character here is this woman in the white dress. She is the most exciting thing happening there for two reasons. For contrast of shape and contrast of value. So contrast of shape. Why on earth would I say that? Well, I want to draw your attention to all of these perfectly horizontal and perfectly vertical lines, minus maybe the detail in there. But when we look in there and squint, it kind of simplifies into an average, which draws actually less attention to it. If you have the same repeating pattern, it becomes boring, right? That's why I advise you to vary the distance between dots if you're making sky holes or whatever.
Even like the tilted picture frame, you know.
Yeah, everything.
It could be a perfect rectangle, but there's, probably enough of that going on. So let's just throw it off axis a little bit.
So what isn't architectural? What isn't vertical? What isn't horizontal? It's this beautiful organic shape of the dress. So contrast of shape will naturally draw your attention to it.
Another example of contrasting shapes in this image is having essentially the armature or the foundation of its composition is all built up of rectangles. So like Tanner said, you have this organic shape, you have this dog, and then even some psychological interest in the mirror where you have that organic shape repeating, and then you even have an ellipse breaking those rectangular orientation of shapes. However, what's going on with that ellipse, Tanner?
Well, first I'm going to switch over to contrast of value because it has to do with that, the correction that we want to make. And actually, the more I look at this, the less it's bothering me, which is kind of interesting.
The artist?
Who is the artist?
We'll put it in
We'll
later.
put it in the video.
Yeah.
We'll add it right here. Okay. So contrast of value, dark against light, draws our attention. We look less back here. So when Ben and I were first looking at this, we're looking at it on my iPad and we're like, wow, this is a great example of contrast of shape with the dress and yada yada. But this back here is kind of bothering us. There's this tangent being where an edge meets another edge, and it's drawing too much attention away from what you're supposed to be looking at in terms of these compositional templates. So I found this a little distracting. This gold frame running right into her hairline makes me look back here a little more than I want to. The more I say, so there's a balance. I'll explain that later. So he tried clearly to resolve that by darkening the mirror. Okay, that's a mirror. Can we all agree on that? I want you to look at a mirror from life. We have one somewhere in here. if you look at a mirror, it's bright. It's the same value as the room. It's the same brightness, same luminosity. So this guy was like, crap, I've created a tangent. I gotta fix that. So what did he do? He glazed the entire mirror darker. And until I pointed this out, I bet you didn't even notice that. Glazed the whole shape darker. He goes, phew, it's not drawing as much attention. I still think it's drawing too much attention. So what I would have done is move the mirror, or the painting over here to be a little bit closer down there to fuse, lose the edge between the hair and the vest. That would draw less attention. Now, the more I read into this painting, which is kind of cool. So we have two different kinds of focal points. Ben, what are those?
There is your main focal point, and then there's a point of psychological interest.
Exactly. So the compositional focal point is the light against the dark. It's the organic against the inorganic. But back here is a secondary focal point, isn't it? He is drawing our attention over there. This is why I'm having self-doubt. Maybe this was perfect. We're looking back here. We're seeing the tension with the frame against her head. And oh my God, there's a man in that painting. Who's the man? Is it her ex-husband? Is she a widow? Who knows? So there's an entire narrative back here. What does the clock mean? It's struck at midnight. Just kidding. So the point of this is that you can hide psychological narratives within dark shapes and light shapes. So
Can we just point out for a second that Dan is a master at that?
that's exactly what I was about to do. Jen! It's okay. It's okay. Okay, I want everyone to look at Daniel Sprick in the back corner. Interesting painting, Daniel Sprick. I'm noticing the incredible fabric on the right side. We see that plate on the left, but oh my God, what is over on the left? If you guys look close, there is a bird skeleton. But key phrase, if you guys look close. There's something to discover at multiple vantage points. From back here, it's all about that beautiful fabric. And it's kind of making me a little uncomfortable in the best way possible.
You see
So
the string?
the string.
It could even be a more subtle example.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
So when we go on break in a moment, and like very soon, I'd encourage you to look close at that painting. There's string all tangled up in the skeleton. It's unraveling the blanket. It's genius. But it's existing within the light shape, providing no contrast, which allows you to discover it later. He's losing things within shapes.
So it's called
Tate.
psychological
Focal point.
Focal point.
The psychological focal point.
Or psychological interest. It's just to reiterate what Tanner's saying, it all has to do with value contrast. If you have your big bright shapes and but paired with your dark shapes, the eye is going to naturally be drawn right there. So if you're creating psychological intrigue, it's going to be maybe in an area of negative space where you want to fill that void with something interesting for the viewer to pick up on after they discover the compositional focal point. Well, here's a whole other layer of intrigue, and the painting benefits greatly from that. And I think with contrast of value, there's with composition, there's all these different elements of contrast. That there's contrast of edges, there's contrast of color, contrast of value, and it's all going on within this painting. But I think what bothers me about this painting is actually the contrast of color, the more I think about it. This like just wall of blue, like you have this nice complementary relationship going, but it's not diverging at any point. It's just...
And this brings up an interesting point. There is a subjective presence to some of this. I disagree with Ben. He is allowed to have that opinion, but he's wrong. Simply wrong. Okay. I find those colors to be lovely. Okay.
I think a
time
break
is it?
would be good. It's
Yeah.
6:55.
Okay, excellent. We're going to take a momentary break. Stand up, walk around, look at that painting. We're going to set up and do 2 demos simultaneously, and I am going to need a volunteer to control cameras. Hey everybody, thank you so much for watching our lecture. We really enjoyed making this one, and we're already in the works for next month's. The next one.
Our next lecture on color is coming up soon. This lecture in composition was so much fun to do. If you came here from YouTube, that was only part of the lecture. You can get the full thing on our Patreon. It's also going up on MFA, which is Kwang Ho's. He posts all kinds of videos on there, tons of artists posting content on MFA, and he was kind enough to let us join in on the action. So this lecture in particular will be up on MFA. The rest of the subsequent lectures all on the Patreon. So hop over there, check that out. That's Platte River Studios. There'll be a link in the description for that.
So I don't know if I said this already, but if you want to join any live lectures in person in Denver, just reach out through our websites or even through the comments section for more information. You can join us and be one of the very few people who actually get to be in the room because we have limited space, and you get to ask your questions live. But let's say you didn't get to go and you really wish you could and you have a question, please leave those questions in the comments. We literally read every single comment, and we're happy to help, no matter how complex or even how simple. We're open to helping all levels. Thanks again for watching. We really appreciate it. See you in the next one.